It's storming outside because it's always storming outside these days, so if you can hear the pounding rain or the thunder, apologies. Today we're going to be doing a review on the Black Prism. As always with my reviews, I'm going to start with spoiler free, where we're going to give you I'm going to give you 3 pros and 3 cons so that you can decide if it's the right book for you, and then we're going to dive into brief spoilers this time, and then predictions, which will also be spoiler filled. Before we do that, let's talk about Skillshare for a second, because they're sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning platform with over 25,000 classes. They have classes on pretty much everything. I personally really like their classes on how to read more effectively and efficiently. They have classes on writing, they have classes on voice acting, and they also have classes on languages. I'm primarily using it to get better at my Spanish. Premium membership with Skillshare gets you unlimited access to all of their classes. It's under $10 a month, and if you use the link in the description, then you get 2 months free. I personally highly recommend Skillshare. They have tons of classes, so you have a lot of different things to choose from. And my husband uses them for photography. Seriously, whatever interest you have, check them out. They have it all. Just about anyway. So onto the Black Prism. I'm just gonna dive into it. As always, we're gonna start with a negative so we can end on a positive. So my first negative with this book is going to be the pacing of reveals. I think that the pacing of the book is great. The thing that I'm saying is negative is the pacing of the reveals. Now, this is obviously a preference thing. It's a review. Everything I'm gonna say is a preference thing. I'm not telling you anything absolute. But for me, the reveal of the pacing of the reveals was something I really had to get used to. There's this major reveal that happens relatively early on in the story. After that reveal happens, it's a great reveal. We all had fun. But then, like 100 or 200 pages later, we actually explain how the real reveal makes sense. So me as a reader, we get the big reveal and I'm like, cool, that was fun, but it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work with the story at all. And I'll talk about that more in the spoilers. And then like several hundred pages later, we actually talk about why it works. We'll talk more about that in the spoilers. But this happens a lot throughout the story where we get some information on something, but I think it's just because the author wants so many reveals throughout this book that he withholds a lot of information in the story. So a lot of times as the reader, I kept thinking, man, this book is full of plot holes. There's like, this doesn't work and this doesn't work. And then several hundred pages later, the author comes back to it and starts explaining it a little bit more, and then there's like the plot holes end up all filling themselves for the most part. Not entirely, but for the most part. I really had to adjust to the pacing of this author's reveals because it's something that I wasn't used to at all, and it's not my preference by any means. I definitely don't like such long gaps between here's a reveal and here's how the reveal works. But it all worked out. I've definitely learned to trust this author, and I expect him to fill in all of his gaps, for the most part. Pro is just the world, the magic system, the world building in general, the characters, everything is just really well thought out and built up. The characters, for the most part, are really, really layered. I know a lot of people really hate Kip, and I understand why. He's basically a boring Neville Longbottom. But I definitely didn't hate him. I don't care about him one way or the other for the most part. He could be written out of the story and I'd be fine. Obviously he probably shouldn't because he's probably important, but I didn't really care about him. But other than that, I pretty much liked every character that was put into the story. It's a really interesting, detailed, in-depth magic system, really detailed world, and really, for the most part, really layered characters. So I just think in general, the plot isn't the biggest focus of the story, at least not in book 1, but in every other element, it's so well built up. Okay, my second negative is that it's not always consistent. There are some gaps that aren't filled. And I don't think it's something that can be fixed in later books. I think that it's just a mistake. It's not entirely consistent. Though I will say, I feel like I can feel people getting defensive as I'm saying this. I will say that that is not true for the most part. Like, it's usually really well done, but there are some inconsistencies, and I'll talk about them in the spoilers. For my next positive, going back to the characters, I love how so many characters are very morally gray. If you love a novel full of very nice, good people. Unless they're the villain, then they're bad. You probably won't like this book because even like our main hero of the story, Gavin, is very morally gray. He's done a lot of really horrible stuff and is continuing to do horrible stuff in the present time in order to accomplish his goals. You like him, I would hope, I would think. You like Gavin, but you don't like everything he does. I really like how layered these characters are. I really like that they're morally gray. I really like that there's this conflict of I like you, but there's so much that you do that I hate. I think that builds really interesting characters. I guess I should have ended on a negative. I'm gonna give you another positive and we'll end on a negative. My next positive is that this book really feels, I don't know how to word this correctly. This book really feels like it's only just the beginning, and it is, so that sounds dumb. But there are certain books that feel like introduction books. It feels like the whole book is built up to bring you to get to know the world and the characters and the basic plot we're dealing with, and then book 2 is going to propel you forward. Sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't like that. This book felt like that a lot to me. This book felt like an introduction book in a lot of ways, introducing you to so many things, and it's going to propel you forward. Something that I really loved about this book, it was so entertaining and informative and a great story on its own, but it built this world, environment, these characters up so well that it just makes me feel like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see what this all built up to. Okay, last negative is going to be, I'm just going to address the thing that it feels like is most talked about with this series. It feels like there's this big discussion, not feels like there is, this big discussion around the series and around book 1 about sexism within the Black Prism. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I really don't want this whole review to be about this, and I definitely don't want my comment section to just be people bickering about whether or not this book is sexist. So I'm going to give you my take real quick, and then we're going to move on to spoilers. I think that a lot of stuff was poorly executed in this book. Brent Weeks, the author, loves describing people's bodies. Kip is fat. He has a lot of girth. He is fat. Also, Kip's fat. Did I mention Kip is fat? Brent Weeks did. There's a purpose to this. There's a reason we bring up Kip's weight constantly. It's because he's really insecure about it. It affects his worldview. It affects the way the world views him. There's a reason for it. It was just poorly executed. Women's bodies are constantly brought up, specifically their chests are brought up a lot. Men's bodies are constantly brought up. There's a scene where one of our male protagonists is naked in front of teenagers, because reasons, and the 16-year-old girl goes on a big long monologue about how sexy hot he is, and I just didn't care. But this sort of thing happens a lot. There are naked adults in front of children in several instances in this book. It's a factor. It's something people bring up a lot. There's usually, in most of the scenes where this happens, there's a reason behind it. It's just almost always poorly executed. Brent Weeks isn't awesome at being inside his female protagonist's heads. Sometimes there is a scene where a teenage girl finds out that her father is dead and she's really super bummed, so she goes off to be alone and she's crying about it and she's really upset about it. And then she thinks about, you know what, I could use a boyfriend, and she's distracted from thinking about her dead father because she really wants a boyfriend. I think he's trying to relate to teenage girls, not how teenage girls grieve. There are other examples I could give. It's almost always with a purpose, but it's poorly executed. Then you have a bunch of scenes that I'm sure you've already heard other reviewers talk about. There's a scene where a woman tries to assassinate Kip. She has large cleavage. She uses the cleavage to fall into Kip so that his face is buried in her chest, and that causes him to be distracted so that he doesn't notice that he's being assassinated. There's a lot of other scenes like this that I could bring up that's just kind of like, what are you doing, man? And honestly, for the most part, I think it's just that Brent Weeks is trying to be funny. Like, he's trying to make these scenes funny. Like, it's a joke. Kip's being assassinated and it's so funny how it's happening, but it's just like really immature humor. There's another situation where a woman is in like this super sexy revealing dress, and because she's ordered to be in that dress because a guy wants to see her in the dress. So she's in the dress, and a guard makes a joke about cold outside, huh? And Kip doesn't get it until he looks at her dress and notices that her nipples are showing through the dress. And then she catches him staring, and then he's embarrassed. And the whole point of that scene is to laugh at Kip. Like, haha, Kip, you're so dumb. You're a teenage boy that didn't get the nip joke, and now we laugh at you. But it's just really immature humor. To summarize, I would not, were there not so much discussion around the sexism in this book, I wouldn't even bring it up in a review, because to me, it was just poorly executed, really immature humor, poorly executed describing of people's bodies, poorly executed trying to be inside a girl's head. I really just think that Brent Weeks didn't execute some things well at all. For me, there were very few times where I really was bothered and felt like Brent Weeks crossed the line. For me, I just kind of rolled my eyes and I was like, your humor is immature, man. Or like, you did a bad job at that. You know, it really wasn't a big deal to me very often. So obviously it bothers a lot of people, and those people should be listened to as well. So take into account what everybody says. But if you want my take on it, if you're trying to decide whether or not you should read this book and you want my take on it, my take is it was just poor execution. It didn't bother me that much. Said I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on it, but I felt like I spent a lot of time on it. Okay, I want to go into spoilers now, so I'm just going to summarize. I thought that the book was excellent. I didn't think everything was perfectly executed, and because of that, I'm giving it 4 stars instead of 5. Enjoyment level was a 5. I thought that it was such a great story with such great characters and so much potential for what's to come in the series. I enjoyed myself with this book from start to finish. I thought it was so great. I didn't think the execution was always 100%, which is why it's a 4-star book for me, but I cannot wait to continue on with book 3. Book 2, cannot wait to continue on with book 2. Loved the book, highly recommend it. Now, going into spoilers. I'm going to clarify a couple of the things that I mentioned. I think I'll just talk about the inconsistencies because I feel like that's the thing that a lot of people are going to wonder about. There were a couple, but the biggest one was probably just in the beginning before the big reveal that Gavin is Dazen and Dazen is Gavin. Being inside their heads, which, okay, I'll say this. I did suspect the big reveal before it came. I did suspect that the brothers were switched. And I don't think that that's a negative at all. I think that that's just proof that Brent Weeks did a good job of putting clues in the story that I was able to pick up on. So that's great. It made the reveal not like this big mind-blowing thing, but I still thought that the reveal was really well, like the way it happened, when it happened, it was really fun to read, and I thought it was good. However, there were some inconsistencies with their head, or with being in their head. So this book is written in third person, but we also get their personal thoughts. Sometimes we get inside the characters' heads while it not being first person. I don't really know what that's called. Is that third person limited? I'm not entirely sure what that writing style is called, but it's one that I haven't seen very often. And so even though we're in third person, since we still get to see inside their heads, we do see that both Gavin and Dazen refer to themselves constantly as Gavin and Dazen until the big reveal happens. And then when the reveal happens, that suddenly isn't the case anymore. Sometimes they refer to themselves as their new identities, and sometimes they don't. Especially real Gavin, the one in the pit, or the one in prison. Real Gavin is constantly referring to himself as Dazen after the reveal, but never before the reveal. Also, real Dazen, fake Gavin, is he usually refers to himself as Gavin, but regularly referring to himself as Dazen after the reveal. With this being third person, with the characters not speaking to the audience and not trying to hold anything back from the audience, and with us just observing the characters, it doesn't really make sense to be withholding information here and then giving all the information here with the way this book is structured. However, I do want to talk a little bit about the part that I mentioned in the spoiler-free section that Gavin, fake Gavin, after the big reveal that he is actually Dazen, it takes like 100 pages, 200 pages to actually address how this is even possible. So this was the big thing that while I was reading kept tripping me up, because I'm like, this is such a cool reveal, but it's so poorly executed because it doesn't make sense. Now, after we got more information on it, I didn't feel like it was as poorly executed, but I still think it could have been done better. So this is the thing, like you tell me, okay, these two brothers, they've switched places, and the way it happened is that Gavin gave himself, or Dazen gave himself a scar to match his brother's, and his face was swollen so nobody could recognize him after he said he killed his brother. Cool, but then what happens when the face isn't swollen anymore? And like, they're not twins. So I don't understand how nobody could have known. And it took like 100 pages, 200 pages before Gavin finally had an internal monologue where he explained to the reader how he got away with it. And I don't really understand why the author chose to wait so long to give us that information and leave us hanging for so long. I didn't really see a purpose to not explaining it sooner. I don't necessarily think he did something wrong by waiting that long. I just don't really understand why he waited so long to tell us about it. And then when he finally did, I didn't think that it was good enough. Dazen liked wearing heel boots, so wait, Gavin, dadgum. Gavin liked wearing heeled boots, so Dazen just wore flats now, and they were basically the same size because there was like a little bit of height difference there. Dazen had a mole on his arm, so he lopped it off. And then we find out that his mom kind of helped him perfect him imitating mannerisms. He had to dress more flamboyantly, like things like that, which are such small changes. Oh, and he like cuts his hair and is better groomed now. These are such small changes, and he does mention that they look so similar, even though there's an age difference between them, even though they aren't twins. They look so similar that people were constantly thinking that they were twins. And I don't know, I just didn't think it was good enough, because I've seen siblings that look super similar, but if you're not twins, you're not twins. Even if you look similar, I can still tell you apart. So I don't understand why the author didn't just make them twins. I don't understand why there even had to be an age gap, because it would have been so much more believable if they were just twins. But with them being brothers with an age gap, and you lopped off a mole and you cut your hair and you gave yourself a scar, I just don't really understand how nobody figured it out, except for the people that he thought might figure it out. He sent out to be slaves. All of his friends and closest confidants and the people that were most loyal to him, he murdered and enslaved. That sucks. I do have a question though that I feel like I must have missed, because it's regularly brought up in the book that there's one prism per generation. One, only one. And then Gavin and Dazen are both prisms. And I think there's even one more mentioned in the book. I'm not talking about Kip, who's probably a prism. That's basically established. He's the next generation. But how did we, once again, they're not twins, how do we have two prisms? Was that addressed, or is that something that's going to be addressed later? Because I didn't really get why this rule was broken in the story. Maybe I missed the explanation of how that works within the laws given throughout the entire book. Okay, we did our spoiler-free. We did our spoiler where I clarified some of my spoiler-free thoughts. Now I want to get into some predictions / expectations for the next book. First of all, Karis. Karis was built up to be such a strong, cool, interesting character. Really liked her from the very, very start. I love Karis's character. But we didn't really get anything from her in this book. We start out with a cool character, we end with a cool character, but for the majority of this book, she's in really strict captivity. So I feel like Karis wasn't really utilized in this book, so I'm very excited to see her character be what she could be in book 2. I have a lot of thoughts and predictions about Kip. So the second Karis said that she gave up a child, I immediately thought, okay, Kip is her kid, right? Like she gave up Kip, she gave him to this mother who doesn't actually love him and treats him horrible, and then this mother moved locations so that she was in a different location so that we wouldn't immediately be suspicious. Until Karis's long internal monologue about how Kip could be my son, but he's probably not for this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. At that point, I thought, okay, he's probably not her son, because I don't think, based off of all that Brent Weeks has done, I think that for the most part, he does a really good job with his reveals, and I have more faith in this author than to think that he would so blatantly try to throw us off a path, like to actually just have a character for no reason whatsoever have this long internal monologue about how this kid probably isn't her kid, just to throw the readers off to think that he's not her kid. I have more faith in him to think that he would do that. I really hope he didn't do that. So I guess Kip probably isn't Karis's kid, but I'm still holding out hope that he is, because I would much prefer that. I think that that would add a really interesting dynamic to everything that's going on than to add another kid into the dynamic. I really don't have any interest in bringing another bastard son into the mix in future books. So I'm still really holding out hope that Kip is Karis's kid, because I don't want this other teenage boy to come into the mix and add a different dynamic. It could be pulled off well, but I just don't want it. I will say, I do think that it's possible that if Kip is Karis's kid, or whoever the kid that she gave up is, It's possible that this kid is Dazen's. Here's why I think that. It is mentioned 3 separate times that I caught in this book that Dazen and Karis slept together before Gavin raped her. Like, reasonably close to the event. It's brought up that Dazen was the one that she gave her virginity to. It's brought up that her brothers beat Dazen up because they thought that he turned her into a whore. It's brought up that Gavin is super like angry and jealous that she gave her virginity to Dazen. Oh, and a 4th time, it's also brought up that Karis is probably the only one that could recognize Dazen and Gavin and their differences because she's seen them both naked, which doesn't really make sense. So 4 separate times it's brought up that Dazen and Karis slept together, and usually within the context of they slept together before Gavin, like shortly before Gavin raped her. So she thinks the kid is Gavin's. I think she could have been pregnant before she was raped. That's my prediction. Not prediction, theory. That's my theory. I think that the kid could be Dazen and Karis. Like, I think it would be cool if it's Kip, but whatever, it could be this 3rd-party child that we haven't met yet. And when we realize that the kid belongs to Karis, everybody thinks it's Karis and the real Gavin's. And then this causes strife between Karis and the real Dazen. But then later we learn that it's actually Karis and Dazen's. And I just think that'd be great. I know that there's this big thing at the end of the book where Kip's mom has this box and she gives him the dagger and a note saying, hey, Gavin raped me, kill him, he's horrible. And now Kip's super conflicted. Is my mom lying to me? Is my dad lying to me? Your dad's definitely lying to you, but probably your mom too. I like to think that his mom, his fake mom, actually just super hates Gavin, and so she's got this big elaborate lie planned because I just still really want it to be Kip. That's Karis's kid, but we'll see. Last thing, and this is probably a pretty obvious thing, the book ends with Gavin dying because he loses the ability to use one of his colors. He got stabbed by the magical mystical dagger. So, I mean, the magical mystical dagger is just taking his powers from him, right? Bleeding his colors one by one. He says he didn't get stabbed by it, but I think he did. This feels like a really obvious reveal, so I'm hoping that if it's true, Gavin is gonna realize it really quick into book 2, because I was kind of surprised that he didn't think about that when his colors started bleeding away from him in book 1, but who knows? I could be wrong about that too. Please don't tell me if any of my theories are right or wrong. This is a theme with my book reviews. A lot of times I'll tell you what I have theories for the future books, my predictions for future books, and then people will tell me in the comments if my predictions are right or wrong. Please don't do that. I want to discover these things for myself. I want to read the books and like learn what happens in the books by reading them. So please don't tell me if my predictions are right or wrong. I'm just sharing them with you in the moment, but I will be reading book 2 very quickly. I'm very excited to read it. I loved book 1. I don't think it was perfect, but I do think it was extraordinary, and I'm so excited to continue on to book 2. I'd love to chat with you more about this in the comments. I post videos every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, so I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.